Hello and welcome to the Starting Admech series, where we go from the first purchase to the first 2,000 point army list and everything in between. In this video, we'll be looking at building our first 1,000 point army list. We'll look at 4 different lists, ranging from budget lists to interesting lists and more competitive lists. Each list will be a little different from the other list, trying to showcase different Forge World options. And as always, I'd like to mention that this video is not intended to simply give you a list, but rather make you think about how you can build a list in certain cases. So don't necessarily just copy what you see here, but rather think about how you would change it up a bit and how you would improve on it. None of these lists have been tested, so this is all theory craft in the end anyway. And as such, it's more of a thought exercise than it is the end-all be-all of what is possible. So let's take a look at our first army list. The first list will be a Mars list composed of a single battalion detachment. This list will be our budget list, and if you remember the previous video, the budget list there was composed of 2 start collecting kits, giving it a low entry point. So let's take a look at what's included in this list. As we are a battalion detachment, we are required to have 2 HQ choices. The choices we'll go with is a Dominus with the basic loadout. For his Warlord trait, we'll give him Divination of the Magos to help our heavy firepower, and for his relic, we'll give him the Autocadius of Archenland, simply because our relics are not particularly exciting, and this one's generally good for hanging back and healing both your Warlord and any vehicles that he might be near. It's not the most amazing relic, but again, none of them really are. For the second HQ choice, we'll go with the Deolosis. The Deolosis is way better at 1,000 points than he is at 500 points, where he kind of struggles to do much work. Though once you get to higher point games, he has a lot more opportunity to buff multiple different targets, as well as target units that are a little more expensive, which you don't really encounter in 500 point games that often. Now that we have our HQ choices, we'll look at our troop choices. Because we're building off of our previous budget list, we'll try to carry over some of those concepts to this list. The first being a squad of 5 Rangers with 2 Arquebuy. And again, the reason for this is because you've probably already built these for a 500 point game, and they're pretty good in general. As we will have a few points left over by the time we finish building this list, we can also give them an Omnispecs to help with shooting targets in cover with their long range. Following the Rangers, we'll take 2 squads of 5 Vanguard, giving one of the squads 2 plasma and the other squad 1 plasma. This plays into what we had previously a bit, as I made a slight mistake in the previous build with the Gaia Forge World using a budget list where I had 4 troop choices, and unfortunately in a patrol detachment you can't actually have 4 troop choices, you're limited to 3. Though in a battalion you're allowed to have 4 troop choices, so I'll take another squad of 5 Vanguard or Rangers, whichever you prefer. And all the special weapons here are carryovers pretty much from previous budget lists, so that's a nice thing to have. You can also potentially drop the Omnispecs and give an arc rifle to one of the Rangers or Vanguard squads. Now for the squads of Vanguard carrying the plasma weapons, we'll pick up a Dune Rider, putting 2 5-man squads with all of the special weapons into the Dune Rider. This will help them with their mobility and positioning to shoot at different targets, as well as potentially taking objectives. And as you embark onto a vehicle at the start of the game, you don't actually have to denote it on your list. You can always choose to put different squads within the vehicle, such as the ones without special weapons, to use them as holding objectives if you believe that the special weapons aren't going to do as much by getting them close to enemy. Now for our special choices, we'll pick up 2 Iron Striders with autocannons. These are just generally good units to have within an Admech army, especially a Mars army, as the autocannons benefit from a lot of their different abilities. You can also choose to replace both of the Iron Striders with a Dune Crawler, and you'll gain some points in that way, or you can even drop 20 points worth of war gear from your troops and pick up another Disintegrator. In any case, if you pick up the Dune Crawler or Disintegrator, it'll cost you a little bit less than 2 Iron Striders, but I do think the 2 Iron Striders are a bit of a better pickup. Now after the fast attack, we'll have our heavy support choices. The first heavy support choice will be a Scorpius Disintegrator with a Belarus Energy Cannon. This carries over from the previous list, along with our different troops, Dune Rider, and so forth. For our second heavy support choice, we'll take 2 Castellan robots, each robot armed with 3 heavy phosphor blasters. They're great for cost savings as they eat up 1/4 of the army alone at 250 points for the 2 of them. They also come with a Datasmith you can run to eat up more points, but unlike the robots, which are good in-game, the Datasmith is just not worth it. Though as you get it in the box, you can try it out to see if you like it or if it does something that maybe I'm not thinking about. The robots are a bit hard to play at times, but they're still plenty of fun and they can still do a lot of work. You might just have a little bit of a learning curve. Again, they're a very powerful unit, but they can easily be played around if your opponent is a little more experienced than you. And that doesn't make them bad, it just makes them complicated, I guess would be the word for it. Though they are great for eating up a lot of points and reducing how much you have to spend on your army. And one other thing to consider is that Datasmith, you can convert him into your Daelosis or into a Dominus, as he's a pretty cool model that gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of what you can use him as. You'll just need to use a little bit of bits here and there. You also have those engine seers from the start collecting boxes, which you convert into other models as well. So you really have a lot of opportunity to save some money by doing some creative conversions versus just buying some of these models at the end of the day. In the end, this list comes out to exactly 1,000 points and will run you about $411 at the Games Workshop store, but if you really want to budget hard and replace the Iron Striders with a Dune Crawler or Disintegrator and convert the Dominus from one of your Engine Seer models or the Datasmith, for example, you can get it down to $340 off of the Games Workshop site. That's actually rather affordable, especially when you consider the potential 15% discount at independent stores. Though it's more of a gunline style of play, which isn't everyone's favorite, but you still have some troops and transports to take objectives, as well as the opportunity to build out into a little bit more of a mobile list if you magnetize your models and choose to run them in slightly different ways. But this is the most affordable kind of list to get to 1,000 points, and considering what it costs after the discounts and conversions, it's a very affordable way to get into what is otherwise a rather expensive army. Moving on to the second list, we'll see that while the first list was a budget list, the second list is definitely the high cost list, and the second list is designed for someone who's interested in playing a Cataphren style of list with a lot of mechanized options. It ends up being very expensive in terms of money, but ends up being a very elite style of play without too many models, which is nice for getting it ready for the tabletop. So let's look at what this list contains. This list will be a Data Horde Forge World list with transnode power cores. This is a very tournament staple list, and it's very playable. It contends with most armies rather easily. Once again, this will be a battalion detachment, so we're required to take at least 2 HQ choices and 3 troops. For the HQ choice, we'll take a Dominus. Everything on him will be basic except for the Phosphor Serpenta, which we'll give to him because we have a couple points left over at the end of the list and we just need to eat them up. We'll make the Dominus our Warlord, and we'll give him learnings of the Genitor to help with keeping the Cataphrons alive. For our second HQ choice, we'll take a Manipulus. He'll have the basic loadout, and for 1 command point, we'll buy him the Mechanicus Locum, which allows him to get an additional Warlord trait, but it cannot be a Holy Order Warlord trait, so we'll give him the Prime Hermeticon trait to reroll melee attacks of units he's escorting. The nice thing about this ability is in conjunction with the Transnode Power Cores on the Arc Claws, as we'll see. This really helps the Cataphron Breachers do a lot of damage in melee, where otherwise they might get tar pitted a bit. And finally, we'll give him the relic of Anzion's Pseudo-Generator to once again buff his number of attacks. And as with the Prime Hermeticon, this will help keep him from getting bogged down in melee along with the Cataphrons so that you can continue shooting with them. And the reason we've split up the abilities as we have between our 2 HQ choices is because if your opponent targets one of them, they're not going to remove all of the benefits from your Cataphrons simply by taking out one of your HQ with snipers, for example. And that's very nice because no matter which one they take out, you're still doing rather well. If they take out your Dominus, they do debuff your Cataphrons a little bit because you're no longer rerolling ones, and they also reduce their survivability significantly as they remove their feel no pain, but your Manipulus can still keep them moving while also being good in melee and potentially buffing their shooting. And as we know, this is going to be a heavy Cataphron list. So for our troops, we're just going to take 3 blocks of 3 Cataphrons with heavy arc rifles and arc claws. They're just going to march with our 2 tech priests up the board, taking objectives and just being a general pain for your opponent. With all of the different buffs they get, they'll move rather quickly, as well as being very resilient and putting out a reasonable amount of firepower. Though as you have a very small core of units as a result of this, for our fast attack choices, we'll take 2 squads of 3 raiders. They have a lot of mobility, but again, they cost a lot of money. Though if you're looking to save a little bit of money, there's conversion options out there using Skitarii bits and other mounted units that can help save some money in terms of budgeting, but the models are really cool, and if you do like them, I do advise buying them because they're just great models and they'll do very well. And once again, the only real problem with raiders is that they're kind of expensive for how many models you get in a box, but they're very good and their stats are incredible for their points cost. Following our fast attack choices, we'll look at our heavy support. In this case, we'll take 2 disintegrators. We can arm one with a Belleros and one with a Faramite cannon, simply because the Faramite cannon does put out a lot of heavy firepower in this case, though you can go with 2 Belleros cannons just as well. but you might find yourself having a little bit of difficulty shooting non-vehicle targets as you won't have anything that's really heavy hitting in long range. And finally, for the last bit of our points, we'll take a flyer, which will be an Archaeopter Fusilier. This is probably the first instance of a flyer in a list like this, and as we all know, the Fusilier is a bomber, so it'll run around dropping bombs on things, producing mortal wounds, and potentially slowing down key targets with seismic bombs. And since the flyers all build from the same kit, if you merge the raiders and reduce them to a unit of 5, you can also then drop the phosphor on the Dominus, and you should have enough points so that you can convert this into a Stratoraptor if you need to. So that gives you a little bit of optionality in terms of what you run it as. And the nice thing about that is you can really test out which one you prefer, as both the Fusilier and the Stratoraptor are very good. They just perform very different functions. So if you're playing this list and you feel like you need more shots of heavy firepower, then try out the Stratoraptor. If you feel like you're lacking in mortal wounds, for example, give a go with the Fusilier. Either one's good and they're both a lot of fun. This list ends up coming in at 998 points, so just shy of 1,000, but you've pretty much optimized what you needed to. And as mentioned previously, it has very few models, which lets you run an elite mid-ranged army. And that can be very fun to play if you enjoy that kind of playstyle. It creeps across the board and is hard to remove while putting out strong firepower. So you can feel like you have a very powerful force. However, there will be cases where if your opponent can put out enough firepower, you might struggle a bit because you have so few models. Still, something like the Raiders do let you take objectives, and the Cataphrons can really easily sit on an objective and just claim it for themselves, with your opponent having a very difficult time of doing anything about it. Though, once again, the downside of this list is that it becomes rather expensive to buy. It comes out to a rather expensive $615 from the Games Workshop store, and that's almost double what the budget list costs if you get it down to as little as you can, not counting the independent retailer discount, as that would probably apply to both of these lists. Though at the end of the day, if you have the money to build this one and you enjoy the Cataphrons, this can be a lot of fun to play, and it's one that I'm probably kind of going towards right now. For the third list, I've decided to go with something a little bit different. Whereas the first two lists are general good stuff that is already kind of proven, I wanted to try something that's a little more creative and fun for this one. Once again, we'll start with a battalion detachment, as it's probably the simplest and most efficient one to go with at 1,000 points. For the Forge World, I decided to pick my favorite Forge World, which is Lucius. With that in mind, let's see how we can build a Lucius 1,000 point army list that takes advantage of the different abilities Lucius has. As normal, where required, to take 2 HQ choices and 3 troop choices. For the HQ choice, we'll take a Tech Priest Dominus with the basic loadout. We'll give him Divinations of the Magos, as it's just a particularly good Holy Order Warlord trait. For the Relic, we finally have one that's a little more interesting than our normal Relic loadout. In this case, we'll take the Solar Flare. The Solar Flare is generally too good to pass up when you get the chance to use it. It's Lucius only, and what it does is it allows the Warlord to blink across the table once a game. This gives him an insane amount of mobility to help buff other units or to simply claim an objective as needed. There's all kinds of tricks and shenanigans you can do with this. In this case, we're probably using it in one of the more boring ways, but once you start putting this on like a Manipulus or something, you can really have a lot of fun. For our second HQ choice, we'll take a Deolosis, simply because the Deolosis is an inexpensive HQ choice that can do a lot of work within a game. For our troop choices, we'll take 2 squads of 5 Vanguard or Rangers. It doesn't really matter, we're just taking these to meet our troop threshold, while also using them to either screen or take objectives as needed. For our third troop choice, we'll take some Cataphron Destroyers with Grav Cannons and Heavy Phosphor Blasters. We're taking the Grav Cannons because they're less expensive in points, and we're going to need to save some points to get our other options into play. The Grav Cannons aren't bad at all, and they're fantastic if you're in an area with a lot of Marine players, because they get a lot of benefits when targeting things that have a 3+ armor save. And the reason we're also taking these destroyers is because Lucius can protect them very well with the teleport stratagem, as well as buffing the Castellan robots, which will take us to the heavy support choice. In this case, we'll take 2 Castellan robots with 3 phosphor blasters each. They're great with the destroyers for the elimination volley, and they're also rather good with the teleport stratagem that Lucius offers because it allows you to better position them while also helping them avoid being targeted early in the game and taken out before they can do a lot of work. And once you go to a 1,000 point army list, you actually have a lot more freedom with your command points, as you start with 6 of them as opposed to only 3, making it a lot more possible to spend command points as needed. Then we'll have a second heavy support option, and we'll take a dune crawler, and you can give it either an eradication beamer or an Icarus array. Both are pretty fun and serve different roles. Personally, I always run the Icarus array, though there probably is an argument to be made for the eradication beamer. I would say give it a shot because I think it's a weapon that's underplayed, despite it being reasonably good for a rather low points cost. Now, one other unit I really like playing in Lucius is the Corpuscary Electro Priests. As I like playing Corpuscary Electro Priests within Lucius, we'll take an elite pick of 9 Corpuscary Electro Priests. You can bring more of them if you want, as they're very good with the teleportation stratagem because you can position them very easily and it doesn't have a requirement in terms of how many you have within a unit. And the reason we took 9 is because it's a good amount to teleport in, while it also gives us enough points to take everything else that we are within this army list. More so, as mentioned already about getting more command points within a 1,000-point army list, you can also use those command points not to just teleport these guys into position to be in shooting range of whatever target you want, but also to give them -2 AP, which really takes their number of shots and supercharges it to put out rather good damage. And finally, to round out our army list, we'll take 2 Iron Striders, giving them las cannons. The reason we want the las cannons versus the autocannons is that we already have a lot of small shots in the Corpuscary, as well as a lot of medium shots from the Castle and Robots and heavy grav destroyers, but we don't really have anything to put out heavy firepower against armored targets. And while we can still take care of the armored targets with the amount of shots we get from all of our other choices, it's nice to have the las cannons as well, just to take out anything that might be a problem in that sense. They're also just rather good in general with everything that we have. As it is, this list comes out to 995 points, so you can take an arc rifle on your Vanguard or Ranger units, or a stubber on the Dune Crawler if you so prefer. The choice is really up to you, neither of them really make or break this list. The nice thing is you can use the Lucius strat on so many different units, so each game will be a bit different, and you'll want to put different things into reserves with the teleportation stratagem based on what you're playing against. Because sometimes you'll want to put the robots in to avoid them being shot down by some heavy firepower. Other times you'll just put the Corpuscary into teleportation just to get them into position. And sometimes you might put a bunch of different units like the Cataphrons or the Corpuscary or the robots. There's just a ton of different play you can do with that teleportation stratagem. And that's what really makes the Lucius Forge World so fun to play. Especially when you couple that with Solar Flare and you can teleport the Magus to give divinations to a unit of Corpuscary that just teleported in. It makes all kinds of fun different plays. The other thing to keep in mind is that the Lucius Canonical is also nice with most of your units, making the priests, robots, cataphrons, and even the Dune Crawler incredibly resilient on the turns that you have it active. You can also keep it active longer with different stratagems, though it does become very command point intensive very quickly. You might be a little concerned that your army doesn't have any transports and none of your units have a particularly quick movement profile, but don't worry too much, as you do have the teleportation stratagem, which in this case will pull double duty, as not only will it allow you to position your units for shooting and keep them off the board until you're ready to deploy them, but it will also help you deploy things in such a way that it gets you across the board a little quicker. In terms of cost, this army list comes out to $488, not counting the Dealosis, though if you happen to find the old Start Collecting Kit with the Dominus, Skitari, and the Dune Crawler, this price actually drops a lot, but those are becoming increasingly rare to find, so you might have a hard time locating one, and that's why I didn't really want to base the price off of that alone. Though if you do want to go with this army list, try your best to find one of those collector boxes, as they'll do you a lot of good in the financial sense. For the fourth list, I decided to spice things up a little bit, and instead of going for a battalion detachment, I went for 2 different detachments with 2 different Forge Worlds, just to show how Forge Worlds can complement one another. In reality, you could potentially make this into 1 detachment and make it a mixed detachment, but I thought I would keep it simple and just keep it as 2 different detachments. The first detachment will be a Vanguard detachment. In this case, we'll make it a Styges 8 detachment, and we'll put our Warlord within this detachment, as that will give us back the most command points in terms of the refund points, as even though we start with 6 command points, this list can be incredibly command point hungry. As we are a Vanguard detachment as opposed to a battalion, we only have to take 1 HQ choice. So in this case, we'll take a Manipulus with the basic loadout, and we'll give him the Relic of the Hand of the Omnissiah, just to generate a few mortal wounds in close combat, and I find it to be a fun relic, though you can always take an Enzions instead. To give him a Warlord trait, we'll take a Holy Order trait of Divinations of the Magos, in order to help with charges, since this will be more of a melee detachment. And as we are a Vanguard detachment, we don't actually have to take any troops, so we'll just completely ignore those, though we do have to take 3 elite slot choices. So for 2 of the elite slots, we'll take 2 units of Fulgurite Electropriests. In one case, we'll take 8 Fulgurites, and in the other, we'll take 7 Fulgurites. This not only helps us with our points, but it also means we only need 3 boxes of Electropriests, as that combines to a total of 15, and each box contains 5 priests. For our third elite choice, I've decided to go with 5 Sicarian Infiltrators. This is probably not the wisest choice, but I think they look really cool and they fill out the slot. Really, you could go with something like an X-101 Servitor or just general servitors to fill in the slot while saving points and using them elsewhere. But once again, I like the Infiltrators and I think they'll be a little bit of fun. They're not the best units in the game right now and they're kind of in a weak situation. But again, I just want to have a little bit of fun with them. Though definitely if you don't have these already or you don't want to spend money on a unit that you might not play in the future, avoid buying these and go for something else while using something like the X-101 Servitor. And as we have so many Fulgurites, we want some way of moving them around the board quickly. As such, we'll take 2 Dune Riders, putting 1 squad in each Dune Rider, and then taking the Manipulus and picking one of the 2 squads to put it in. Generally, I would put it in with the 7-man squad simply because they're at a little bit of a disadvantage compared to the 8-man squad, but definitely you could put the Manipulus in the 8-man squad so that if the Dune Rider does happen to explode, he can buff their movement speed a bit to help them move quicker and charge a little better. Finally, to wrap up this detachment, we'll take 2 Iron Striders and give them las cannons as opposed to autocannons. They're good for the heavy firepower and they benefit from the Stygies dogma, which gives them a little bit more durability. You can definitely choose to make them autocannons and once again pick up some more units elsewhere, but as you'll soon see, you're kind of lacking heavy firepower in this list, so they're good for taking out armored targets. For the second detachment, I've decided to go with a patrol detachment and making it a Graia Forge World detachment. And what this detachment is intended to do is just to deny psychic powers while also taking objectives. In this detachment, you'll have an Engine Seer with no extra equipment. You'll have 2 units of 5 Vanguard or Rangers with no equipment, and then for a fast attack, you'll have a 5-man squad of Taraxi Sterilizers, and that's the entirety of that detachment. And as you can see, this detachment is here mostly just to take objectives and to help with Psychers. So looking at this list, your first detachment will be your workhorse, doing most of the damage, bullying enemies, and just being powerful overall. The second detachment can be merged into the first, as mentioned before, to take a mixed Forge World detachment, and you'll save some command points by doing this, but you'll lose your dogmas. Though you can also opt to not have 2 different Forge Worlds and just make this a pure Stygies list, that will also help you save some command points while taking different units. And as mentioned before, this is kind of a command point hungry list, as you want command points for your Graia stratagem as well as the Stygies infiltration stratagem to help move up those Dune Riders early in the game. The second detachment, which is the Graia detachment, is there to lend support. It benefits from their dogma rather well, as all of the models have rather low wound count, being Vanguard or Rangers, and the Taraxi are infantry, so they can use this stratagem in games where you have to deny Psychers, which is the main reason for taking a Graia Forge World, since they give you that powerful stratagem. You mostly want your second detachment to be taking objectives, hiding, and using their stratagem optimally. The Sterilizers are able to be more proactive in clearing out chaff units, but can also just drop in to take objectives and deny with a bit more of mobility using that stratagem. And if you happen to drop the Infiltrators to swap them out for the X-101, for example, you can pick up more Sterilizers to help with a little more clear out and mobility. And once again, you can always merge these 2 and take the Sterilizers within the Vanguard detachment as well as other units. But I thought this would be a fun example of a 2 detachment army, which we haven't really seen yet. Without any modifications, this list comes out to 1,000 points exactly, which is always nice as it means you've used up every point you were given, and it comes out to a total of $559 from the Games Workshop store. Anyway, thank you for watching, and if you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for future content. Thank you and have a great day. Bye.